This week's Torah portion, this Torah reading, is Vayeira. And the pasuk starts, the portion, the parsha starts with Vayeira olav Hashem, that it appeared to him, Hashem, in the straits of Mamre, and he was sitting Pesach ha'oil, at the opening of the gate, the heat of the day. Clearly this is a continuation from the previous, where it speaks about the story of Avram receiving the mitzvah of circumcision, the mitzvah of bris milah, and Avram goes through the process, at 99 years old, goes through the process of performing a bris, performing a circumcision. And now he's sitting at the entrance, the door to his tent in the heat of the day, and Hashem appears to him. But if you look very closely, it doesn't say that Hashem appeared to Avram. It says Vayeira elav, Hashem appeared at Vayeira elav Hashem, and Hashem appeared to him, sort of to the essence of Avram beyond description. In fact, also grammatically, it should have really said Vayeira Hashem elav, speak about who is being revealed, that Hashem revealed himself to him. But it doesn't say that. It says Vayeira, there was a revelation to him, Hashem, which suggests a type of intimate, essence to essence revelation. There's a place of name, and this is beyond the name. Before describing the name of Hashem, giving the description of the name of the divine, whether it's the name Hashem, Elokim, Kel Shakai, whatever the name appears, which is the experience, the way Avram will experience prophecy. Here, it's Vayeira elav, the essence of the Creator that is beyond description, reveals itself to the essence of Avram. What does this mean? And how is this in a continuation to the previous experience that he had, which is the idea of performing a bris, a circumcision? And what is the metaphor? What does it represent? Now, it's on a literal level. The Zohar writes that because he performed this action and he got rid of the arlo, this thing that was covering over, so there was a revelation on his body, a physical revelation within his body, and that caused a revelation on, and as an experience, as a mystical experience, a revelation of Hashem, of the Creator. On a deep level, what this means is that there was something that was a concealant, something that was covering over, something that was stuck and inaccessible. It's an arlo, something that's covering over, and then that was peeled away. And because Avram experienced this inner revelation within himself, therefore he can have this mystical experience. And in this mystical experience, we shall understand what this experience is. What exactly is this idea of peeling away this concealment? What is the concealment? On a metaphorical level, when it refers to every human being, so what is it actually, the experience? So he's having this experience, and then he lifts up his eyes, and then he sees there are three people standing in front of him, and he sees them, and he runs to go greet them. And this is, of course, the story where he encounters the angels, because later on it speaks to them as an encounter of angels. Whether this was in a purely meditative state, which is the way the Rambam, Maimonides, the Rambam understands this, or it's on a literal level, which seems more simplistic way, a more simple way of reading the Pshat level in the Torah, that he actually experienced them. And famously, the sages say from this understanding of him in the midst of a mystical experience, Vayeira olav Hashem, Hashem is appearing to him, and he's experiencing his highest level of dveikus, of unity, a mystical union. And then he lifts up his eyes and he sees that there are three people there, and he goes to greet them. That greater is the acceptance, is the greeting of guests, even greater than the experience of receiving the light of the Shekhinah. because he's in this mystical experience, and he walks sort of out of the experience to go greet his guests. The reason for that is, like the Brisker Rav and others write, that because the mystical experience, the experience that he's having is dveikus, oneness with Hashem, some type of mystical union. And then there's the mitzvah of the practice, the mitzvah, the command of Kabbalah's, of Bikr, of Achnasas Archim. The Rambam writes as part of, all these mitzvahs are part of mitzvah Haftarah L'Orecha Kamocha, but it's a mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah, so that's part of the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. So the mitzvah trumps, the mitzvah is higher than the dveikus. The command is higher than the dveikus. So what does that actually mean? Let's try to understand this more on a more inner level. There's covering overs. There's maltimus arlos levavchem. There's a covering over the heart. What is the covering over the heart? The covering of the heart means that there are certain, on one level, it represents certain types of definitions that we have about ourselves, certain type of stories we tell ourselves of who we are in this world. Let's say a person is intelligent, so they tell themselves that I'm a smart person. Or if a person's a very compassionate person, so that I'm a compassionate person, I'm an empathetic person. Every person has a particular story or stories that they tell themselves. Often, the story that we tell ourselves of who we are in this world allows us to be in this world only to a certain extent and only during certain times. Let's say, for example, a person has a certain self-image and tells himself the story that they are an intelligent person, a very thoughtful person, a cerebral person. Okay, that's the image that they have of themselves. So when they're engaged in cerebral pursuit, when they're engaged in intellectual pursuit or an intellectual conversation, they come alive and they feel like now they can show up because they are intellectual people. So therefore they can show up to life now in these intellectual moments, and that's when they show up. But what happens when this individual person who believes themselves to be an intellectual is commanded, there's a mitzvah, there's something that demands their attention that is not necessarily intellectual. Let's say they ate food and they have to now put away the food or take out the garbage. This is an image that I use often. So there's the idea of, let's say they have to do something that seems to be trivial or meaningless, or not intellectual. So they show up to those areas in their life almost like haphazardly. Like, really, I'm an intellectual. I would love to do intellectual pursuits. But now I can't, because now I have to do something that demands less intellect and more physical labor. So therefore I'm doing that. So when I do that, there's a certain level of disconnect that I'm not really, if you're this intellectual person and you define yourself as an intellectual person, when you do intellectual things, you feel alive because you feel that's where you can show up. But when you have to show up to life, because it's the demand that forces you to show up to life for things that are not necessarily intellectual, you don't show up to life completely. Because those are areas that you feel like you cannot shine. So therefore you don't show up. This is one way that the images and the stories we tell ourselves of who we are holds us back from being fully present in life. But it's even deeper than that. It's not only because there's a certain type of story that we tell ourselves, and therefore only those types of areas in my life do I feel like I can show up, and the other areas I can't. But it also means, yes, let's use an analogy of you're an intellectual person. It also means that every time you're experiencing something in this world, you're not actually experiencing the thing in itself. You're always overlaying the experience with your story. Your story is always projected on the thing that you're trying to experience. You're not experiencing the thing in itself. Or let's say you're not experiencing the person, and let's say you're encountering another person. You're not encountering the other person. You're encountering yourself in conversation with the other person. You're an intellectual being. Let's say you're engaged in intellectual pursuit, in an intellectual conversation. So you could be present, you could show up there. But because you're so stuck to your story that you're an intellectual person, besides the fact that maybe you're self-conscious continuously to make sure that you sound intellectual, and you're ensuring to yourself that you show up in this way that you're intellectual, that's one level. That's one problem. That the self-consciousness of constantly trying to show up in that way. And let's say you do get so swept up in the conversation that you're no longer self-conscious about being the intellectual in the conversation, but because you're always the intellectual, that's who you show up to this world. So the intellect of how you think about this world and your intelligence always overlays the experience of what you're having. You can't really enjoy, let's say, eating food, for example, without overlaying the experience of eating food with some type of intellectual story that's overlaid on the experience in itself. So there's a double negative here, both because you can only show up in particular areas, and even when you show up in the areas that we could show up, you're always overlaying any type of experience, an old experience that you have, whether it's intellectual or not. You're always laying over the experience. There's the experience actually what you're having, and then you're overlaying the experience with your story that's now wrapped around the experience of life itself. So therefore, you can't experience life itself. The idea of circumcision inwardly, that a person has to get rid of the holding back and the covering over and the foreskin that's covering over the self. What this deeply means is, and this is why it has to be done with a tremendous amount of Mesiras Nefesh, tremendous amount of self-sacrifice and conviction in a way that's can be scary and is that you have to let go. In order for really to truly experience life in its totality, in its fullness, whether it's experience life of existence or experiencing life as an encounter with another human being, to truly experience another and to truly experience life, you have to choose to let go of that overlay, of that identity that you hold dear to yourself. That because I'm an intellectual, I always have to make sure that I'm showing up to the things that are intellectual. And when there's an intellectual conversation, I have to make sure that I'm showing up in the correct way because I have this self-image of who I am, and therefore I have to make sure you're self-conscious about showing up that way. And even when I'm having a conversation, I'm losing myself in the conversation. It's all about me, but it's never about the other. In order to truly encounter another, to truly be alive to existence, you have to peel away those identities, peel away those levels of self-consciousness, the levels of certain perceptions and stories, and just allow to be in the experience of what you're experiencing. And that's what the Torah is saying. The Torah is saying that Avram, on a very meta level, a very deep level, when Avram let go and was able to go through the circumcision, which was a violation to everything he thought was true and real at that point, because he was told by a command to do this mitzvah, and he peeled away all those narratives, then it was the essence of Avram experiencing the essence of life, the essence of the Creator, just like he was experiencing the essence of life in his own self, because he was able to show up completely and to be present, Yoshev, to sit, to be settled in Pesach Ha'ol, in the tent, in the opening of the tent, which means in the opening space of the world, of the movement, where there's movement of angels moving back and forth. He was able to be in that place of complete stillness, of complete being in who he was, and therefore his experience of the divine was also not in a particular dimension of the divine, or kaviyachol, in a certain way it was expressed in a particular name, and this name represents chesed, kindness, and this name represents intelligence, divine intelligence. But it was the totality. It was Vayeira Elov, the fullness of the Creator kaviyachol, of the one became revealed to the fullness of who he was. And there was an essence to essence encounter. Before the story, in the previous readings of the Torah, Lech Lecha, Avram is the philosopher. And the philosopher is engaged with life in a philosophical way, and engaged with others in a philosophical way, and engaged with the divine in a philosophical way, an understanding of God. Over here, since he went through this transformation in his body, and it was also an embodied experience, and he got rid of those narratives, so to speak, and became a revelation to himself of his essence, the beingness of life in itself. Therefore, he was able to encounter Vayeira Elov beyond Hashem, beyond the name of Hashem. He was able to have that experience. Therefore, when he was sitting there, and then he saw those people, angels, and he was able to greet them. It was greater, the receiving of these guests, greater than the receiving of the presence of the Shekhinah. What this means is that there were not two separate experiences. It wasn't that he was first experiencing the divine and the fullness of the divine, the fullness of Hashem Kaviyachol, beyond the name, and then he lifts up his eyes and then he sees that there are other three people, which is sort of like there's another story. There are two stories here. But because he's experiencing the fullness of self in an encounter with the divine, he's experiencing the divine as the creator of the fullness of all creation at all times. And therefore there's no duality, there's no separation. G'doila Achnasas Archim, the greatness of Achnasas Archim, the expansion of the idea of greeting guests is part of Kabbalah's Pnei Shekhinah, is part of the greatness, is part of the receiving of the Shekhinah. Receiving the Shekhinah's light when it's not in a particular way. If receiving the Shekhinah's light is in a way of Dveikav's transcendence, if the receiving of the Shekhinah's light is in the way of Seichel and intelligence, then you're receiving light, the Shekhinah's presence, in your understanding. You're receiving light of the Shekhinah's presence in a state of transcendence. But if you're receiving the Shekhinah's light in its essence, so the essence is reflected in the essence of all life. That's the mitzvah Shabbat. That's the idea of the mitzvah. There's dveikus. Dveikus is an experience, a feeling. Mitzvah is misachs al atzmus. Mitzvah connects us to the essence. The essence of life is experienced in the immediacy of life, not in the understanding of life, in the overlay of my understanding of how we're experiencing life. The essence of life is experienced in the actual experiences of life. And the acceptance of guests and the receiving guests and feeding these guests is in the immediacy of life. And that's the type of Shekhinah, that's the type of revelation that was experienced by Avram. Avram was experiencing the ultimate Vayeira Elov, the essence of the Creator Kaviyachol was revealed to the essence of himself, and therefore the essence of himself was revealed himself to the essence of the Creator, and creation revealed itself in its pure essence, and the pure essence of the thing revealed itself in the immediacy of things. The ultimate mystical experience is not the mystical experience that is detached from any other normative experience, because that's a mystical experience that is a particular type of mystical experience. It's a mystical experience that's maybe in the mind, or maybe in the heart. The ultimate mystical experience, the highest level of the mystical experience, or the greatest secret, is revealed right now, is the open secret. The greatest revelation, even though that in itself is contradictory, but the greatest atzmiastic, essence type of revelation is in the immediacy of life, in the mitzvah, in the actual physical action that he was doing. And that's what Avram received. It was not two different experiences, because he experiences within his body, because he had this transformation within his body of letting go of these narratives or conceptions or paradigms or prisms of way of understanding things, and therefore always overlaying his understanding of how he's experiencing life, but able to experience the fullness of life, in the fullness of himself, the fullness in encounter with the divine, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol. Therefore, he was able to experience that mystical experience of Kabbalah Shekhinah in the receiving the Shekhinah in receiving of his guest. And that's the highest, deepest level that we're trying to experience. And like the Rebbe Rashab once said, when he was a young child, he came to his grandfather and was crying, and he said, why is it that Hashem revealed himself to Avram Avinu, he doesn't reveal himself to me? And Tzemach Tzedek told him that when a person to 99 years old decides to do a bris, then Hashem will reveal himself to this person. Which Tzemach Tzedek is not saying that you cannot do it, like the Rebbe reads, not saying that you cannot do it. He's just saying what it entails for us to receive this type of experience, for us to have this type of essence of Vayeira Hashem, is we're ready to do Mesiras Nefesh, ready to live our lives, and to, in a way that we can let go of everything that we know, about ourselves and just to truly experience the divine, to experience our essence, and that's the Mesiras Nefesh. That's tremendous self-sacrifice in this process. Have a wonderful Shabbos.